I'm Jackie Heinrich in Washington. This is the Sunday Briefing. President Trump is wrapping up the holiday weekend at the White House after delivering a late-night address to thousands at the America 250 celebration on the National Mall. In his speech, the president celebrated America's history and touted the country's military strength.
Our rise to being the world's strongest and most powerful nation was no accident of history. We use it, and we've had tremendous success. You look at Venezuela, you look at Iran, we wiped out their military.
Coming up, I'll be joined live by Enes Kanter Freedom and Jimmy Fela on the massive America 250 celebrations around the country. But we begin with a Fox News alert. Iran's top leaders attending a second day of funeral ceremonies in Tehran for the late supreme leader, who was killed 4 months ago at the start of the U.S. and Israeli attacks. Massive crowds calling for revenge against the U.S. and Israel. Negotiations over a permanent end to the conflict remain on hold until the funeral ceremonies conclude later this week. For more on the Iran peace talks and the future of U.S.-Israel relations, also what's next for the region, I'm joined now for an exclusive interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining the Sunday Briefing, sir.
Well, good to be with you, Jackie. And again, congratulations on your marriage.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I want to jump right in. Your relationship with the U.S. president has faced some recent tests over Iran, but you shared a very warm call marking the 250th birthday of this country. You called the U.S. a guarantor of global freedom, and you arranged a meeting here in the U.S. soon. When is that meeting set to happen, and should people take this as some signal that any potential rift has been mended?
I don't think there's a rift. America called us the model ally because we're, unlike many of your so-called allies, we actually fight alongside you. Our brave soldiers and your brave soldiers fight shoulder to shoulder. I think America has no greater ally than Israel, and Israel has no greater ally than the United States. Now, let me tell you this. President Trump is the leader of the United States. He does what's good for America. I'm the leader of Israel, the one and only Jewish state. I do what's good for Israel. 99% of the time, we see eye to eye. But in any family, in any close friendship, there are sometimes differences of opinion, and we discuss them openly, I can tell you, in a free spirit, and usually we resolve them too.
That free-spirited debate has made some headlines recently. Last month, the president made clear that you're going to have to accept whatever deal with Iran that the U.S. reaches. He told the Financial Times he won't have any choice, I call the shots. And then he doubled down on this yesterday, telling Axios Netanyahu knows who the boss is. Do you accept that the U.S. would have final say when American and Israeli interests diverge?
Well, first of all, let me say that we have an excellent relationship, which is defined, as I said, between allies. He's obviously the leader of the United States, which happily is the leader of the world. And Israel is a very strong, vibrant, democratic state. In fact, the only democratic state in the Middle East in a very large radius, and we're great allies. I think that the real question is, do we have differing goals when it comes to Iran? And the answer is no. We are set on the same goal. We want to see Iran give up its nuclear weapons program. We want to see the nuclear enriched material removed. We want to see the enrichment sites for nuclear material dismantled. We have other common objectives. And President Trump believes that after the battering that the two of us, Israel and United States and Israel, gave to Iran, he thinks that he can generate enough leeway, enough pressure through the negotiations to get these goals achieved. And we respect that, and I hope he succeeds. But I can tell you this, deal or no deal, as long as I'm Prime Minister, Iran will not have nuclear weapons.
On this memorandum of understanding you're referring to, in the meantime, Iran has been doubling down on its intention to charge tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. They've been cashing in on the 60-day sanctions waiver. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, they've also been fortifying tunnel entrances at some of the nuclear sites and reconstituting their defenses. Many of your supporters have argued that Iran came out ahead in this negotiation. The regime is still in power. There are key elements of the nuclear program that are still intact. And the waiver could reportedly generate billions for the regime over these 60 days. The president reportedly has told aides he is okay if these talks blow past the August 18th deadline for a nuclear agreement. Are you okay with that?
Look, did you ever go to the opera? I mean, I'm not a big opera fan, but when I came to the opera the first time, they gave me the cliche. You know, it's not over until the fat lady sings. And you know what? It was over after she sang in that particular concert. I would say it's not over. I would judge it when it's over. But as I said, I think the most important thing is that we have a common goal. And that means Iran cannot have nuclear weapons or the capacity to make nuclear weapons. There are other goals as well. And I think we've been very lucky that President Trump is leading the United States, leading the free world in this common effort. And believe me, if I have things that I want to point out to him and bring my own opinions, I do so in a free way. And when he has things he wants to tell me, he does that in a free way too. That's what friends and allies do with each other.
Your defense minister indicated that Israel is prepping a unilateral strike package for Iran. First of all, is that true? But second, would carrying that out be more politically difficult if you chose to go there after the vice president said this? Listen here.
Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
What was your reaction when you heard that?
First of all, I respect J.D. Vance. We have a very good relationship, but doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says. And I have to point out this. Donald Trump is the greatest friend we ever had in the White House. And I stand by that completely. Secondly, we have some other friends, like a small country called India. You know, it has 1.4 billion people. And boy, do we have a tremendous support there. Mm-hmm. You know, I have this Facebook thing, and I'm just flooded by the overwhelming support there, and we have many others. Let me tell you where we have support, because it's fashionable now, and you know, in many countries, because their media and their social media are inundated with anti-Israel, anti-Semitic material. Many leaders, you know, call me up and say, "Hey, look, I've got this problem with public opinion, but I want you to know we respect you, and can we make some deals, and can you teach us some of the things that your military does, and can we have some of your AI and cyber expertise?" You know, Israel is the #2 country in cyber in the world, and our technology is absurd. It's so good. The relations are not quite as they appear, and we have many, many friends. And I have to tell you, we also take care of our friends, especially the Christians in the Middle East. The Christian villages in Lebanon, some of them have actually asked to be annexed to Israel because we protect them against the Hezbollah fanatics who want to kill them. And we do the same things with Christians everywhere.
Well, you're leading
Christians in the Middle East.
You're touching on my next question, because a source close to the vice president's team told Politico that statement that he made reflects his view of this new political reality where, quote, the vice president sees that the ground is shifting against Israel among voters, including with younger Republicans. He's responding accordingly with nuance instead of stridency. Do you take that as a warning that if Israel were to act alone, the Trump administration would withhold its backing?
Well, first of all, it concerns me that there's that element of anti-Israel, first of all, in the Democratic Party and in the woke right. I'm concerned with that, and to the extent that we can do something to mend it, obviously I'll do it. But I find that there's something unique about these attacks, and that something is that the people who hate Israel end up hating America. And I've seen that, you know, when they do these, these demonstrations, these protests against Israel defending itself, this tiny country defending itself against these terrorist murderers who commit to exterminate us. We do what any self-respecting country would do. We defend ourselves. But when they do the protests, they burn Israeli flags, and very often, right next to them, they burn American flags. But when those Americans who support Israel, non-Jews and Jews alike, when they do a demonstration to support Israel, they wave the Israeli flag and they wave the American flag. So I think there's a process taking place inside America, which you probably know better than me, of questioning America's traditional values and going to many places that I think challenge not only our alliance, but they challenge the traditional values that form the basis of each of our countries. And I hope that's not something that is going to proceed. I hope America changes direction. That's really what I hope to see.
And you're touching on this growing trend of anti-Semitism, especially among young people, and I'm going to ask you about that next. But just to put a pin in this piece of the conversation, what do you say to critics who argue that Israel has embraced sort of a permanent state of war and that there's not really an end game here? Because they point to places like Gaza and say that Hamas, is still in power. They haven't laid down their arms. What do you say to those critics who accuse Israel of being in a permanent state of war?
Oh, we're not in a permanent state of war. I myself, with President Trump, we brought forth 4 peace deals. That's what we did. It's the Abraham Accords. And I believe with the weakening of Iran, which has been achieved by our common action, our common military action, I think we're going to get more because countries would like to align with us and to protect their future and also their prosperity. Israel is a powerhouse. I mean, it's an engine of innovation, of AI, of quantum, of just of everything. So I don't see that. But I'll tell you one thing. I think that the Lebanon deal has shown that we have more cards to play. Lebanon would like to free itself of Hezbollah, these Hezbollah terrorists who are, making their life miserable. And it's not only the Christians in Lebanon who ask for our protection. It's the Druze, it's Muslims, the Sunni Muslims, and quite a few of the Shiite Muslims too. So they'd like to free Lebanon. I hope we can get more peace deals. And I can tell you, if you want to have peace, you better be able to protect yourself against those who want to annihilate you. We do that. But in defending ourselves, we're defending our common civilization, the people who chant death to America. Last point, Jackie, in the funeral of Khamenei, which was held yesterday, they chanted, the Iranians, including the organizers, they not only chanted death to America, they said, kill Trump. They chanted death to Trump. Well, you're not going to hear that in Israel. Israel is the best ally the United States has anywhere around the world.
Well, that brings me here, because I want to make sure that we talk about this sweep of democratic socialists on the left in America who have unseated a number of moderate, even some progressive incumbents who are very well funded. Happened in New York, happened in Colorado. And for many of these candidates, Israel's becoming their purity test. Listen to this.
It breaks my heart. Someone who wrote good legislation for queers is so terrible. Gaza.
So that was California State Senator Scott Wiener, Jewish Democrat. He's called the war in Gaza a genocide. He opposes U.S. funding for Israel, and he was driven out of the annual trans rally by activists raging about his Zionist handlers. And then you've got Congressman Dan Goldman, also Jewish. He just lost his primary over his ties to AIPAC, despite being one of your most vocal critics. So what do you think is happening here in America?
I think there's obviously a very anti-Israel and an anti-American wave, and I think they're connected, because then look at the values that they have. What do they want to see? Do they want to see a strong America defending America's interests and around the world when it's necessary, or do they want to see a different America? And of course, also on the foundations of free markets, for example, that I believe in very strongly. And that many Americans have believed it, and I think they made America great. No, they challenged that too. So I think there's a correlation between that. And unfortunately, people who know better, I would say who should know better, but I think they all know better. And these people let themselves be swept by these irrational protests and this very toxic ideology. I don't think it lasts because I think America can try it.
Okay.
Just try it. Try socialism.
Final word.
We tried it. We tried it here. It didn't work that much. So I decided to try free markets. It worked a lot better. And,
Okay.
Americans will eventually get that picture, too.
Final word here with about 15 seconds left. Taken together, what the vice president said about younger Republicans and what we're seeing with this growing radicalism on the left, are you worried about the long-term durability of the U.S.-Israel relationship?
I worry about the trends that I see. I won't tell you that I'm not worried about it because I think it has something to do with frankly, with the social media, with the penetration of social media that has been used and abused by countries, three in particular, and they've had bot farms that push the stuff against America and against Israel, and it focuses on young people and young Americans, and I can't say that I'm not worried about the effect that it has. How do you combat this? It's hard because democratic countries don't have the ability to fight this this bot war and with the same means. We are accountable, we're transparent. It's not so simple. But I think you'll see a correlation between the penetration of certain social media and the decline in patriotic American feelings and support for Israel.
Okay.
It's something we have to deal with. But am I worried about it? Look, I think that our alliance is not merely based on common interests. I think it's based on common values. And as long as we stick to those common values, freedom, the right of every individual to live and not be slaughtered by fanatics. People should have free choice in their lives.
Okay.
And of course, to have our common heritage, which has brought so much to the world. I think as long as we have that, our alliance will be fine.
We'll have to leave it there.
The most important thing that I can say, Jackie, in closing, is that I want to wish you and the people of America a happy 4th of July. 250 years of freedom, and frankly, 250 years of defending freedom. America has been the stellar force in this century and in the past one, in modern times. If you hadn't had America, you'd have Nazi totalitarianism, Stalin totalitarianism, and others. And I think America has been a great force for good. That doesn't mean that it's perfect. Israel is not perfect either.
Okay.
But it has been a force for immense good. And our alliance has been a terrific one. And it'll continue to the extent that I have anything to do with it, and the people of Israel, who are unabashedly pro-America.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we'll have to leave it there. We are out of time. Always appreciate talking to you, sir. Thank you for joining us once again on the Sunday briefing, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Jackie. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Well, Republicans are facing new divisions as President Trump pushes Congress to pass the Save America Act. That's next.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.